Everyone. Thanks for joining today. Really excited to have everyone here. You all should be able to see my screen here already. I am ready to jump in today about winning strategies for TACFI. It's going to be a STRATFI, winning strategies for STRATFI today. That's what we're here to talk about. It's going to be a fun conversation. We have everyone up as a attendee. And so if you have any questions, I have Q&A open. Feel free to jump into the Q&A and we'll go ahead and dive right in. Thanks everyone for making time today. A little bit about why are we the ones talking about this? Well, that didn't work. Let's try again. All right, you should all be able to see my screen. Why am I the one talking about this and why are we doing this here at the Outpost? Our company is built by a lot of the founders who created AFWorks. I helped create the STRATFI program itself. And STRATFI is the biggest and best tool to help you transition from initial R&D contracts to long-term sustainment contracts. And I'm deeply passionate about this. And when we created AFWorks, the whole goal was to see companies transition. And now here at the Outpost, as one of the managing partners, I get to do that and work on that every day. And it's the best place to be. And we've helped tons of companies go through the STRATFI program. We've won multiple $30 million awards. And we want to help companies like you do that here today. So that's what we're here to talk a little bit about. We want to help get you set up for success in the STRATFI, TACFI programs in this whole world. So we're going to go ahead and dive in. What is the purpose of the STRATFI program? And the entire intent of the STRATFI program is to facilitate transition for companies who have an SBIR or STTR phase 2, and then help those companies get longer term contracts by tying in the program office and programs of record or the major center across the Air Force or Space Force. So these programs can transition to long-term programs of record, to an operational use case, to actually being used by the warfighter. And this program is built to facilitate those conversations with the end users and customers that are actively using this product, and then giving them an incentive to have matching funds at the table. So instead of saying, hey, we're asking for money, can you look at this capability? You can now come to the table and say, hey, we're going to bring matching funds to the table. And if you allocate some towards this capability you already want to develop, you can bring additional funds and double your money. Or you could even triple your money if you're counting some of the private matching funds that are also being brought to bring the capability to bear. So the entire intent here is to help companies transition, help them scale, and to do that in a way that it incentivizes programs to consider this as a meaningful transition pathway. So what are the matching fund options here, right? So today we're focusing all around STRATFI. So there's two programs you want to be considering. There's the defense only program, which means you need to bring $2 government dollars for every one SBIR dollar you bring to the table. So if you bring $30 million of government dollars to the table, you can then unlock $15 million of SBIR money. And this can be done, your minimum that you need on this side is $6 million of government funds. And this can be done over a 4-year period of performance. And you can stagger that money over that time. You can bring in different colors of money here as well. You can bring in our DT&E money. You can bring in operations and maintenance funds. You can bring in a combination of those things together to help drive forward the match here on the defense only side. And one of the great things about the defense only side, right, is this is showing that for the government customer gets additional funds for each dollar that they bring to the table. And this is allowing them to sort of defray some of the further R&D costs that it might take to integrate the product. And this is also fantastic for companies who haven't raised any venture capital or are looking to grow this and fully build it on the strength of the government customer that they're working with. Any questions on the defense only STRATFI piece? All right, I'm going to move over to the dual use side. And so on the dual use side, you do need to bring private capital to the table. And private capital in this sense can be more than just venture funding. It can also be pre-sales, and it can be an advanced purchase order of your product. It has to be cash in exchange for something. And generally, when I say something, on the equity side, it has to be cash in exchange for equity. Um, it could be venture debt in some ways. And then you can continue going down the route for like cash in exchange for an advanced pre-order or sale of your product. So Kickstarters count towards your private matching funds. So if you're doing a $5 million Kickstarter, that can count towards your private matching funds. And then on the government and SBIR side, you need to have at least one part government funding, and that'll be matched by each part SBIR dollar. So let's go through an easy example here, right? So if you get $10 million raised on the private side, then you need to bring in $5 million from your government customer, and that'll get matched with $5 million on the SBIR program. So what you get to do is go to your government customer now and say, hey, for every dollar that you put in, we're going to get a matching dollar from the SBIR STTR program. Oh, and I'm bringing in $2 for every dollar you put in through the private capital side that we're going to use towards these efforts in general. The unique thing about this is that the private funds don't go on contract, but the government does want to see how you're using that for the commercialization of the product that you're looking to sell through the STRATFI program. So if you're building out a digital platform and all the tools and funding you get from the commercial side, you're using to build out the tool set for the digital platform that you're selling, all of the money you're spending and engineering you're spending towards that can count towards the matching funds options here for your dual use STRATFI. That's one of the most amazing things here about the STRATFI program is that it truly incentivizes the engagement from a customer on wanting to bring money to the table. So wanted to cover the eligibility criteria real quick. These are all based off of the last round of the STRATFI program. We expect them to be the same. And so if you are on an active phase 2 SBIR or STTR, you have to have been on that phase 2 award for at least 90 days. This last round also said it doesn't have to just be an Air Force or Space Force SBIR or STTR for you to be eligible to apply for the STRATFI program. You can also have completed a phase 2 within 2 years of package submission. So we're expecting, hey, the applications and submissions will be out this fall. So in that case, you want to think about it and look at it as, hey, did I complete did our phase 2 end within the last 2-year time period? And we can go through any of those specific dates and in one-on-one questions if you have it. Another key thing to note is that you can't already have been awarded a sequential phase 2. So if you have a TACFI award that got awarded as a sequential phase 2 instead of a modified to your previous phase 2, then you can't get a STRATFI on that phase 2 award. You can't be executing another STRATFI. That's one key thing. You can only have one STRATFI at a time. The work needs to be performed in the United States, and then you need to be able to get the matching funds requirements. And then the most important piece here is being able to get the end user and customer collaboration agreements. The collaboration agreement is going to be one of the most important packages, as this describes how your end user and customer are engaged with you in this process. And that customer collaboration agreement, it's also going to talk about what the transition strategy is, where the funds are coming from, why the DoD needs this, why the Air Force or Space Force specifically need this as well. And it talks about where the customer is seeing the transition story or narrative in place. So having a collaboration agreement where you specifically call out, hey, there's funding aligned against this program element for this capability, that kind of tie-in greatly increases your chances for success around the STRATFI application. Because what you're showing is that there's funding for this type of capability to be developed, and you want to be able to double down on that and keep going that direction. So you might be wondering, hey, what's the timeline for this year? We're expecting it to open in the fall, similar to last year, and it to be a small 30-day window again to like, oh, what does that mean for me if I'm working on STRATFI? Well, that means you need to be working on it right now, or even start a few months earlier. You need to make sure you're engaging with your customers today about potential funding commitments. You need to be educating them on the STRATFI process, because this timeline and this window is going to be really short. And if you want to be working on a successful STRATFI package, you need to be able to do that right now. And you have to walk through all of these different pieces of a application with your respective stakeholders. Not only are they signing a collaboration agreement, that they are actually responsible as the government owner to submit this package, which means you have to work with them to fill out over 200 different fields of information and help them get that ready for submission. Plus, you have to get your own capability package ready that explains what the effort is for your company and what you're doing, plus how that builds on top of your phase two. So there's a lot of these different pieces that have to come together. You also have to bring together the matching fund letters from the private sector and or the government sector. You will absolutely need your matching funds letters on the government side, whether you're going for the dual use or defense only STRATFI. It's a key part of the process. You're also going to need to get finance and contracting engaged. You need to have a finance and contracting office at the customer level that's saying, yes, we're going to take ownership of this. And if and when you get selected, that they will take the actions to put this on contract. The unique thing about the STRATFI program is that it is not AppWorks putting it on contract like the phase ones or phase twos. Is actually going to be the customer who you're engaged with for the long term. So going back to like the key nuggets here for success, you really need to be talking with the customer on how are they taking ownership of this program and incentivizing them through the matching funds process. That's a core part of what you want to look at and do here. So you might be thinking like, hey, what are some of the mistakes I need to watch out for? There's a lot of things you said we need to do on the last slide. You need to make sure you're fully filling out the capability package. AppWorks has provided a template specifically around this, and each part of those need to be answered in a specific way. Whether that be your transition narrative, it needs to be your tie into your phase two, the tie into the large scale defense need. You need to be able to tell the story from the individual unit level all the way to how this is going to have an impact across the enterprise. And is it going to have an impact beyond the Department of Air Force enterprise? Is it going to have an impact across the DoD? Can you tell that story and shape that narrative? What does that look like? You need to make sure that you have the right signatures on your packages. You need to make sure you have the right level of signatures as well. For a STRATFI package, the end user signature has to be at an 06 or GS15 level. And then for a customer, it has to be the director or the deputy of a program office, an Air Force Center or Space Force Center, or a MAGCOM level equivalent, A staff as well. So those things need to be clearly laid out. You need to have those signatures on the package, specifically on the customer side. You want to be clear about your fund matching and when that fund matching counts, both on the private side and your government funding side. If you have a phase three that you've done within the last 6 months of package submission, then that would qualify as part of matching funds, but you want to make sure that you're within that date time frame as well. So if you're working on a phase three right now, you might want to, hey, if you get that done today or in the next 30 to 60 days, you're still going to be within that 6-month window, right, that we're expecting. But if you got a phase one done back in January, a phase three done back in January, that may not count as some of your matching funds. So you have to look at, well, when does that phase three get renewed and what does that look like? You want to make sure the milestones and funding alignment are correct. So if you're getting different colors of dollars, so if you're getting RDT&E dollars in one place and you're getting O&M dollars in another for government matching, are you spending the right money on the right milestones? This is a process where you need to walk through and truly understand what qualifies for our DT&E, and we have a separate webinar we can do on that. And then you also have a operations and maintenance line, which you need to make sure, hey, you're buying the right things with that, and you're not buying development with that piece. You're doing the operations and maintenance of the system in that case. We talked a little bit about the document signatories. You need to make sure you're tying this back to a correct phase two contract. You need to make sure that the information that goes on your collaboration agreement ties back into your capability package, ties back into what's actually submitted on the application and the 200 plus fields. We talked about making sure you have finance and contracting acceptance. And then you want to make sure you're using the latest versions, right? The last version you might be building templates off of right now, or the 24.2 version, but you're expecting to use the latest version when it comes out. So you want to make sure you're tracking that. All right, we have a question. Shandiz, yes, this is recorded, and we will be sure to send out any information that's related to this. All right, the operational imperative tie-ins and great power competition. Why does this matter? A STRATFI is focused on a strategic funding increase. What is the strategic imperative of the Department of the Air Force that you're tied into? How are you going to meaningfully change the order of battle? What are you doing to have a capability that improves the warfighter's ability to execute on the mission? And the mission of the Air Force and Space Force right now are to make sure we can win in the great power competition, and not only win in a fight, but be able to deter the next fight because our capabilities are far enough ahead. What are you doing to accelerate in that timeline? How's your capability extend beyond a specific unit to a enterprise-wide effort? That's what you need to be able to communicate in your STRATFI package. You should be able to tie that line all the way through to have a successful engagement and to talk about the strategic need and impact of what you're building. And you have to be able to do that with the Air Force or Space Force program offices. So here's a list of all of those program offices that may be signatories on your collaboration agreement. And you have that both on the Air Force side and the Space Force side for the PEOs. And then you also have all of the centers that can be signers. In addition to this, you also have all of the major commands that can be signers on this, and the A-level staff that can sign off on your package as a customer. These are the organizations you need bought in. These are the organizations that you need to have signatories from and funding set aside for your capability package to be successful. All right. So things you might be thinking for like, hey, what do I need to win the STRATFI or TACFI packages? You need a deep engagement with your strategic lead for the effort. You're going to want to have an 06 or GS15 who's going to be championing this to both drive the signatories on the customer side and as your end user. You need to understand what your timeline for delivery is here. A 4-year period of performance means that funding in the out years is still a little questionable to be determined, right? How do you predict what funding is going to be available 3 years ahead of time? Even the best and biggest companies in the world don't know about that, and you don't know the shifting landscape. So what timeline are you projecting your execution in? Is it going to be the full 4 years? Is it going to be in a 2-year time period? What color of money do you need in that timeline? And then who's responsible for execution within that organization? Are you going to have leadership changeover? Are you going to have different stakeholders? Who is your contracting team going to be over that 4-year period of performance? Those are some of the questions that you need to be able to answer as you're driving through this. Another key thing to note is you want to let the data speak for itself. You've been executing on a phase 2. Talk through that data. Use that as your narrative to build support for your STRATFI package. Letting the data talk for itself is going to be how you win over the different stakeholders. And you need to make sure that you're engaging with them on a consistent basis and communicating this information. And then lastly, understand how money works. We're in a year where the budget didn't drop for the first 6 months. So there's going to be a lot of opportunity to scoop up money through unfunded requests. And you need to understand who owns the budget at the end of the day to be able to drive an unfunded request in place and potentially use that as matching funds, whether you get that on a phase 3 contract or you get some commitments to what you're doing. This is one of the key ways you can build on the matching funds process here. All right, so we submit the package. Then what happens? It goes through an internal review process within the Air Force and Space Force. There's going to be an initial review done by the Ventures team, And then there's going to be a functional and strategic review about how it fits in with the enterprise goals that we talked about earlier. And that's going to be done by a team of folks from across the Air Force and Space Force. Then there's a funding board that decides, hey, do these meet an impact level for the entire Air Force? And then if an SBA waiver is needed, it's a part of that process. And then the funding decision and support. This is like, hey, everything's been approved. You get your notification right here between steps 4 and 5. And then it goes back to the stakeholders for execution, and you get to submit a response with your contracting office. And finally, you get to the award process. This can take 6 to 12 months to go through this. So as a startup, you also need to be planning that if you're bringing in matching funds through this process, you might want to consider like, hey, what that timeline is, and can you get the government funds on contract ahead of the STRATFI execution timeline or during the STRATFI timeline, because it takes sometimes up to 6 to 12 months for that response and then getting a follow-on contract award. So it's one of the things you want to watch out for as you're planning cash flow and having a successful STRATFI package. You don't want to let any funds expire. You don't want to let any of your venture funds not commit until you have this package. You want to make sure you have those commitments locked down and get that process during award. All right. I'm going to pause here for questions since we got 8 minutes. These are some of the previous cycle STRATFI results, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have about the STRATFI process. Please feel free to hop into Q&A and ask any questions you might have. Here to help and demystify what this process is. Charles, I also see that you raised your hand. Let me see if I can just give you ability to talk. Not, feel free to throw your question into the Q&A and I'm happy to answer there. So it doesn't seem like I can. Carrie, if you're up on the net, can you see if you as the host can give Charles the ability to chat today? All right, Jason, you asked to the timeline slide for the upcoming cycle. We're expecting it to be in the fall of this year. So here in the next 2 to 3 months, expecting that we're gonna see information about the fall program, and then we'll know the submission timeline, and we expect it to be about 30 days. This is similar to what it was last year. They release information in September with due dates in October. All right, anonymous. It might take 6 to 12 months from submission to know whether you've been selected for the award, or from award receipt until formally on contract / receiving government funds. So the last 2 years for the STRATFI program, it has taken 6 months last year for the selection notification, and then it's taken another 3 to 6 months for those companies to get on contract. So it takes up to 12 months to then formally get on contract. And then we also have a look back to the year before, where it took them 12 months to provide a response, and then an additional 6 to 12 months for some of those to get on contract. They're speeding up that process. That's part of why the contracting and finance letters are so important, because those organizations are committing to a 90-day timeline turnaround for a STRATFI award. Depending on if that organization has done it before, it may or may not happen in that timeline, and they might need some facilitation and help around that process. And that's what we're seeing in the ecosystem this year. Can a company do a TACFI and a STRATFI? Yes, you can, as long as you have not been awarded a sequential phase 2 off of your TACFI. Haven't seen a lot of information around the TACFI window. We expect the TACFI window to open up post the STRATFI window. So again, in the next 2 to 3 months as well. Ask, hey, what does the outpost charge to prepare a STRATFI package and success fee on the win? We have a tiered structure as we go into these larger deals. and happy to talk to you about that one. So feel free to reach out and happy to talk to you about it. Charles, I see that you're up on the net. Happy to chat.
Yeah, hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, man. How are you doing?
Hey, I'm good. It's great. It's great to see you. Yeah, I just wanted to ask the question because I think it might be a little bit more complicated for me to be typing it in. But since we're developing a medical device, we are starting to have conversations with DHA. All of medical and health are starting to align under DHA. So one of the things we're trying to figure out is the balance between working with them and the requirements for working with the Air Force. Like, does the end user has to be have to be Air Force versus a customer. Can you talk a little bit about that in terms of that alignment between DHA and the Air Force in regards to medical technology?
Yeah, those STRATFI requirements mean that you have to have an Air Force end user sign on the package. And as on the customer side, you need to have a tie-in to the Air Force mission set. So working at the DHA level, you will need to be able to tie that back into maybe the Air Force Surgeon General's office for what you're building and why they also have a need for this. So being able to pull that thread from DHA back into the Air Force units is going to be an important part of the process.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Great chatting with you, and glad you were on the webinar. We should catch up around DC sometime.
Oh, we will. I'll reach out.
Sounds good, man. Heard that another STRATFI round would be open in spring 25 for space only. We're expecting to hear that as well, right? We saw that there was a space only STRATFI round earlier this year. We're expecting we'll see another space one. So what I'm seeing in the ecosystem is that, hey, we're going to have a fall submission for an Air Force STRATFI package and then a spring submission timeline for the Space Force packages, right? Because we have two different organizations working on these. We have AFWorks and SpaceWorks. So I'm expecting that, hey, they're going to keep some of these staggered to keep that opportunity going. But you need to be working on these packages now if you really want to get the funding in place. And then can you do both a TACFI and a STRATFI? If a company does both, can it be off the same phase two? Yes, you can, as long as you didn't get a sequential phase two award for your TACFI. Then you can't have a STRATFI off of that same phase two. For matching funds, can repeat what private funding sources are acceptable to the STRATFI were. Yeah, you can do any advance purchase orders. You can do pre-sales of a future version of your product. You can do venture debt. You can do venture capital. You can do any type of even sort of like state level matching funds could theoretically count here. We can get creative around that. So Zach, happy to have a further conversation and talk through some of those details. All right, Jackson, with the timeline, should we begin your milestones approximately 12 months later, knowing it'll take that long to get on contract? I would say plan your milestones for about 6 to 9 months later. Realistically, I think that's a good timeline for you to project. But yeah, realistically, it's been about 12, but they're trying to speed it up. So for your government customer sake, I'd plan about 6 to 9, then expecting there might be a delay. And then again, if you can get your government matching funds on award earlier through a phase three, right, then you'd want to get moving on those and use the phase two funds use the phase S2, the SBIR STRATFI funds as an accelerant to the development of what you're doing. All right, can I reiterate on what we said about explaining trade-off spaces? Yes. So the Air Force has a budget today. And if you are going to bring in a new capability, what are they going to stop paying for, right? The Air Force already has an existing budget. If you are going to take a portion of that budget and now use it for something else, what is that trade-off? What capability are you improving or building on? And why should they stop funding this portion of their budget to now fund this capability you're bringing to the table? So if you think a little bit about your grocery budget, if I have $50 set aside for fruits and I have $25 set aside for a new capability, but your new capability here is going to cost $35, that $10 has to come from somewhere else, and that would likely come from your fruit budget. So now go over here and pay for this. And so that's the kind of trade-off that you have to be able to explain. But instead of it just being a grocery bill, you now need to look at strategic capabilities across the force. All right, we're at time. Happy to answer any other questions and or set up individual calls. Hope everyone's doing well today. And thanks for asking a ton of questions. Take care.
Thanks, Joey. Take care.
See ya.